Mr. Alvier, welcome back for another chapter of Cabin on Trouble Creek by Jean Van Leeuwen. I always say that author's name with a slight little kind of trepidation in my voice. I'm not quite sure if I'm saying it correctly, but I'm just going with it. Jean Van Leeuwen. I'll show you what it looks like. Maybe it's Leeuwen. I don't know, but I'm going to say Leeuwen. Jean Van Leeuwen. Or for all I know, maybe it's Jean Van Leeuwen. I don't know. Anyhow, Cabin on Trouble Creek, Jean Van Leeuwen, chapter 14, I believe. We left off at the end of chapter 13 where Dan was thinking to himself, we're alone again. We're alone. It's winter. No Solomon, no Mom and Pa. The snows are coming. And it's cold. Chapter 14. It started with a few thin flakes falling slowly out of a pewter gray sky. Daniel thought that it would stop, as they had so many times before. But the snow continued to fall. It came down all morning as the boys checked their snares and carried in wood for the fire, and all afternoon as they skinned their good-sized rabbit that they'd caught and began preparing the skin to become part of a rabbit fur hat. As the sky darkened into night, Daniel looked out the cabin door. The snow was coming down fast now, a thick, swirling curtain of white that hid everything behind it. Daniel woke several times in the night, listening. He wasn't sure for what. He heard no sounds outside, no chorus of wolves or low hooting of owls this night. All was silent. And silence was all he heard when he awoke the next morning. As he slipped out from under the blanket, leaving Will still sleeping, his hand brushed against something cold and wet. Snow. A powdery coating of white covered their blanket. Looking around, Daniel saw little piles of snow here and there along the cabin walls. It must have drifted in through the cracks in the logs where the chinking wasn't tight or had begun to fall out. He hadn't done as good a job on the chinking as Pa would have, Daniel thought with a pang. He and Will had hurried and taken time out to go fishing. Pa would have gone over those log walls until you couldn't see a peep of daylight anywhere. And he'd have been watching to see if any of the chinking fell out and replaced it if it did. Well, nothing could be done about that now. It would just have to wait until warmer weather, when they could dig up more clay. Daniel stirred up the fire and piled on 2 new logs, and then went to the door to look out. And as he pulled aside the blanket, snow fell in on his feet. Snow was piled up all around the cabin. It covered the 2 wood piles so that he could barely make out where they were. Snow clung to the sides of the dark tree trunks. It had buried the stumps, which looked like low, round, white hills. Daniel couldn't tell how much had fallen, but he guessed if he stepped out into it, he'd be up to his knees at least. "What happened?" asked Will behind him, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. He had snow in his hair, Daniel noticed. "It snowed all night," Daniel said, "and it's still snowing. And it snowed all day, too." Each time Daniel looked out the door, he saw the flakes falling steadily, piling higher and higher around the cabin. In the afternoon, a cold wind came up, blowing the snow around. More of it sifted in through the openings between the logs around the blanket door. At dusk, it was still snowing, and the wind had picked up, whistling around the cabin walls, blowing cold drafts down the chimney, seeping in the cracks along with the drifting snow. The boys huddled close to the fire, wearing their blanket coats and fur mittens. Even so, Daniel couldn't get warm. The chill wind that forced its way into the cabin seemed to blow all the way through to his toes, and he felt it right down in his bones. He kept going to the stack of wood next to the fireplace, adding another log to the fire, warring against the cold. Warring, too, against the growing feeling that this wild blizzard blowing outside was too powerful for two boys alone in a small, leaky log cabin. The woods would win. Those great trees had wanted them gone from the start, Daniel thought. From the first moment that he'd seen them, he had felt it. The trees, the wild varmints lurking out there among them, and now this cruel storm were too much for them. They were beaten. No, he told himself. He couldn't think that way. He owed it to Pa and Ma, especially Will, to keep fighting. The storm had to stop sometime. They had enough wood inside to last them until then, he felt sure. Daniel was thankful that he brought in so much. But what about after that? Would they still be able to catch game with deep snow on the ground? Would their snares still work? And what about fishing? The creek would be buried under ice and snow. They would have to chop their way through it to even try. Will had been moving around quietly, heating the rabbit stew left from yesterday. "This will warm us up," he said. The rich, hot meat and broth did warm Daniel's insides, and it got his mind to feeling calmer, too. This might be the last meal of rabbit that they'd have for a while, he thought, and they scraped out the last tasty bits from the pot. Still, they had the sack of cornmeal and the two tall piles of firewood outside. Those were the most important things. If Pa was here, Daniel knew what he'd say. With food and firewood, they could get through the harshest of winter. If they kept their heads. And if no wild varmints attacked them. But Daniel couldn't let any doubts creep into his mind. He just wouldn't. On a stormy night like this back home, Ma would have her Bible out, reading their favorite stories to distract them all from what was going on outside. Daniel wished they'd had a Bible now, or any book to read. He had heard those Bible stories so many times that he about knew them by heart, he thought, and most likely Will did too. "Hey, let's tell stories," Daniel said. Will looked at him blankly. "What kind of stories?" "Bible stories," Daniel answered. "Like Ma read to us. I'll start." Well, the way that it was snowing outside, like it was never going to stop, put Daniel in mind of Noah and the ark. Of course, that had been rain, but it must have felt the same to old Noah, Daniel thought. The book of Genesis, Daniel began, just like Ma always did. Chapter 5, or maybe chapter 6. I can't remember. Anyway, God finished creating the world, and he thought it was real fine, but after a while he got angry with man on account of his wicked ways. He got so riled up he just couldn't swallow it anymore, so finally he decided to destroy what he had made and all the creatures in it, except for Noah. And Noah, you see, he was about 600 years old. Daniel remembered that part real clear. He'd always wondered how a man could get to be that old. And finally he asked Ma, and she said, "Well, those Bible folks, they lived a good long time." Well, it seemed like he was the only good man in the world, so God spoke to Noah and told him his plan to flood the earth and drown everyone. Noah would be saved, he said, if he built himself an ark. So God even told him how to build it, and he could bring his family inside, and two of every living creature, like cows. Will said, starting to smile. And horses, and pigs, and chickens, and elephants, added Daniel. You see, this was the best part of the story when Ma told it. She would stop her reading, and they would all take turns saying animal names. Daniel liked to say elephants because he had seen a picture of an elephant in a book once, and they were the biggest creatures to have to fit in the ark. Sarah would be sure to say butterflies, and Zeke always said frogs because he liked them the best. And so does Mr. Alviar. Daniel could see them all marching into the ark, two by two. So Noah did what God told him to do, he went on. And sure enough, as soon as the ark was finished and they were all inside, it commenced to rain. And it seemed to rain for days and days. In fact, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Seemed like it never would stop raining. The water covered the land so deep the ark was floating on top of mountains. 40 days and 40 nights, Will repeated. He looked like he was thinking what Daniel was thinking. What if it were to snow for 40 days and 40 nights? But finally, it stopped raining, and the ark came to rest on top of a high mountain. Noah sat inside the ark for about 40 more days and nights, waiting for the floods to go down. It seemed like they would never go down. He sent out a dove, and it flew right back in. And he sent it out again, and this time the dove came back with an olive leaf in its beak. And that's how Noah knew the land was dried out. The dove was Ma's favorite part of the story. She would pause and smile like she was seeing it in her mind, that white dove with a sprig of green in its beak. And then God spoke to Noah again, telling him he could leave the ark. So at last old Noah opened the door, and he and his family and he and all the other living creatures came walking right out, and they gave thanks to God. Well, that was how Ma always ended the story. Will didn't say anything for a moment, and neither did Daniel. Just like those nights back home, in the quiet, Daniel thought the wind might have died down a little. Well, that was a good story, said Will. And we'll stop right there. We'll read chapter 15 tomorrow. And don't forget to tell your family how much you love them. Don't forget to take some time to spend time with your family. Dad asks you to come on outside and help him out in the yard, or help him in the garage, or maybe Mom wants you to help her, in the garage. Maybe Mom wants you to help her outside in the yard. Or maybe somebody wants you to help them cook in the kitchen, or do some cleaning or something. That might mean they want to spend time with you. So spend some time with them. Tell them how much you love them. We all need to hear that. Now go brush your teeth, because I know that you've been eating junk food. I ate a lot of junk food today. In fact, at one point I had Nutella all over my face. I'm not gonna lie. It was good. But I brushed my teeth. So go brush your teeth. Wash your hands and wash your face. And then get into your clean pajamas. And when the time is right, get to bed and have a good night's sleep. And I'll see you tomorrow, 9:15. Adios, amigos y amigas. Oh, it didn't stop. Sorry, let me try that again. Adios, amigos y